Okay, now let's talk tactics. Basically, tactics are going to be the methods you use to accomplish your strategy. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what day you're going to do it or how you're going to make it work. We're just going to talk about little tips and tricks that you can use to accomplish your objectives. I'm going to start by going back to my story. I talked about how I started adding one new recipe to my repertoire each week and just really trying to expand my skills and what I could make. I did this for several years, and of course it changed as I added children and as I ebbed and flowed in my interest and priorities. But basically I kind of kept that up for a long time, about 10 years maybe. And then I decided it was time for another strategy. I kind of wanted to move it up another level, and especially my skill level. And so I found this cookbook. It's called The Science of Good Cooking. And I decided that I was going to cook through this cookbook. This is a cool cookbook because it goes through, 50 concepts. That's more than I even remembered. Just teaching concepts like gentle heat prevents overcooking, high heat develops flavor, and each concept has recipes that teach you that concept. And these weren't like cooking chicken over and over again in one section or a lot of repetition. For example, in the first section about cooking with gentle heat, it had me cook a prime rib right off the bat, which was slightly intimidating, but I did it. And then it moved on to cooking eggs, hard-cooked eggs. And then a shrimp salad. So there are a wide variety of recipes for each concept, so it didn't get monotonous to be eating out of this cookbook. And what it did for me was it brought some excitement and the joy of learning and developing skills to cooking. It kind of rejuvenated my enjoyment for cooking, and that just totally fits my personality. I love to learn, and this was perfect for me. This may not be a good fit for you, but it's just an example of how your tactics and your strategies can change over time. So this took me, before you get too intimidated, this actually took me about 2.5, maybe 3 years to cook through this whole cookbook. And to move on to logistics, I just chose one day a week that I didn't have a lot going on, and that was my cooking day for my quote-unquote cooking class. And I would just cook something out of that cookbook, and if we liked it, I would add that to my repertoire. If not, I at least had the skills. I added that skill to my skill set. By the time I was done with the cookbook, I am very confident in the kitchen now. You can give me a piece of meat and I can pretty much figure out how to cook it without a recipe. And I know lots of different methods of cooking. I know how to use different ingredients. It was a huge help in my overall confidence in the kitchen. So sometimes that can be a great strategy to figure out what can give you confidence and increase your skill level. So I mostly shared that example so that I could show you how the strategy, tactics, and logistics all fit together, especially as we start talking about tactics. So a couple of other examples. My friend Julie Cornwell wants to really work on making her grocery shopping more streamlined because she feels like she ends up darting into the grocery store for this and that throughout the week because she doesn't have a set plan. So this is where your tactics can really make a big difference. If your goal is to stay within a tight budget, you're going to want to start your meal planning with ads from the grocery store so that you can make sure that you are on target with your budget and that you're saving as much money as possible. So let's start talking about your menu schedule. This is important because it will kind of drive everything else. How frequently do you want to create menus? And part of that consideration is how often do you want to go grocery shopping, and when do you have time to sit down and plan, and how far in advance do you know your weekly schedule. So this is something that also changes over time. When I was a young mom with little kids, I really did not want to go to the grocery store very much, and that was one of my main priorities. And so I made monthly grocery lists and monthly meal plans and grocery lists so that I could consolidate those and get as much as possible with just maybe a couple runs to the grocery store for fresh produce in between. But that way I just had to do it once, sit down, make my menu, and I was done for the week. My friend Kara Farnsworth did the same thing when her kids were younger. But both of us have found that as our children have grown, and we now have teenage boys, both of us, we really can't keep enough groceries in the house to go grocery shopping, do our main grocery shopping once a month, or to even do our meal planning once a month, because we don't know our schedules that far in advance. So this is going to depend on the stage of life that you're in and the stage of life that your kids are in. Now I have gone to meal planning twice a week. That seems to be a great fit for my family, and I'll talk more about our logistics for that later, but that's just what works for us. Kara and several of my other friends have moved to a weekly schedule just because they only know their schedules a week in advance, and that allows them to make a more realistic meal plan, and then they don't have to keep more than 1 week of groceries in the house at one time, filling up their fridges and freezers. So obviously you can do that. You can shop more often if you'd like. Kind of the European way is to go shopping several times during the week so that you get what's fresh, or you go to the markets. It really depends on your shopping situation and your family size and situation. But it's a good thing to think about as you're starting out. Now the next thing is kind of more involved. What is your starting point for choosing what meals you're going to make? So again, this is going to depend largely on your strategy and your situation. So first you have to think about where your recipe sources are coming from. Most moms I talk to have some sort of master list of the meals that they make on a regular basis. If you do not have one, I highly suggest this because you're not reinventing the wheel every time you sit down to meal plan. You have a set list of things that your family likes. And in this workbook, we have a place so that if you don't have that already, you can start one, and you can just brainstorm all the foods that your family likes and put them in one place. My friend Kara, who we'll learn more about later, taught me this system of using cards for your meal list. So instead of having it a written list like in this workbook, she's written them all out on scrapbooking cards. Hers look way better than mine, but honestly, aesthetics are not a priority for me, nor is penmanship. So you'll see that as I show you my cards. So what I have done, following her lead, is I've written our go-to meals on these cards, and I keep them in this old-fashioned recipe box. They don't actually have a recipe on them. They just have the name of the meal, and I focus mostly on dinner for this. They have the name of the meal and then the ingredients that you need to make that meal on the back. Of course, ignoring things like pepper and salt or spices that you always have on hand. This is a great idea that I adopted from her, because then you can use these cards also to make your shopping list. Or if you're in a pinch and you're like, oh, we're going to have this, this, and this, you can just bring these to the grocery store, and then you have your list right on there, and you can just pick up what you need. So I love this idea as an alternative to just a simple list. Some people keep this running list on their computers so that they can add as they go. Some people also keep them on apps. There are apps that let you store both the meal ideas and the recipes themselves right there, and we'll also generate shopping lists for you. Paprika is one that does this. I've used Mac Gourmet in the past, and I probably will still use it in the future. I'm just kind of out of that phase at the moment. So there are lots of ways that you can keep track of what you already make and what your family already likes. Janae Koo does it all digitally. She doesn't use a specific recipe app, but she uses a to-do list app that allows her to schedule her meals, and we'll go into detail about that later. Another good source for your recipes are obviously cookbooks. You may have your go-to cookbooks like I do. I still refer to this Science of Good Cooking because, again, I've tried everything in it. And so I know what I like. I also kept elaborate notes in the cookbook so that I would know what I liked. You can kind of see some marginal notes there. That way I know not to repeat the same mistakes, and I just make little tweaks that work for my family. Another go-to book is this slow cooker cookbook for those nights that you need to be able to prep ahead. So we probably all have our little go-to cookbooks or go-to blogs or websites that we use to find our recipes. A lot of people use Pinterest for this purpose, and they have different boards for recipes they've tried or recipes they want to try, and that can help keep you organized with some of the recipes you just find online. So your recipes and your meal ideas are one thing that you should bring to the table when you're having your meal planning session. That's what we're really talking about right here. The other thing that you may or may not need when you're doing your meal planning session is your calendar. Now, when my kids were little, this was pretty irrelevant. Like, our days looked mostly the same. We didn't have much going on in the afternoons. But now that my kids are all elementary and middle school age, we have a lot going on from week to week. It changes, and there are some nights I can count on just being crazy, but I really need to have my schedule and my husband's schedule and my kids' schedule in front of me. So usually I have a calendar planning session before I do my meal planning session, but when I actually plan the meals, I have my calendar with me so that I can make this meal plan based in reality. So you can decide if that's something you need at your meal planning session. Some people, especially if you're on a tight budget, really want to sit down with the store ads in front of them so they can know what's on sale, they can get the best deals, and they can base their meal planning around what's on sale, what's fresh, and what's seasonally available. This is actually something that I tried a couple times, and it was so overwhelming that it got in my way. I found that I was saving enough money just by planning in advance and planning rollover ingredients that I would use for several different meals that I didn't want to add another element into it with the store ads. That said, some people really enjoy that part. They really enjoy finding the bargains and especially using seasonal ingredients, all those exciting things. So you really need to know what floats your boat, what makes you excited, and use that strategy. That will also determine your logistics, because you'll probably want to do your meal planning on the day that the ads come out, or at least within the right window so that the ads will still be relevant when you go grocery shopping. So something else to think about. Another good starting point for your meal planning session is to just go around and check what you already have. Some days some weeks I will clean out my fridge right before I do my meal planning session so that I know what I still need to use up, what I'm out of, and what can be a starting point for my meal planning that week, or those 2 weeks, depending on how long. Also, your freezer. I'm really bad at letting things get buried deep in my freezer and forgetting about them until they're freezer burned. So that's one of my current objectives, is to really utilize what I have and waste less food. So I am trying to start each planning session by at least rifling through my freezer and picking a few things out that I want to thaw that week and use. Same goes for your pantry. You can look through what you have in there and base a meal off of that. Those are all great ways to both help your food budget and to eliminate waste in your house. Janae Koo at times has really kept a good inventory of that, where she'll actually write out everything that's in her freezer on her phone, on an app in her phone, and then she can just go through that and keep that updated. I've never been quite that ambitious, but one fun thing that we are starting to do is when my kids help me with the meal planning, and I'll go into that a little later, but we're kind of playing a MasterChef style game where they'll all grab something out of the freezer and we'll have to come up with something to make with that week and put it on the menu. It's kind of brings a little fun into it and gets the kids involved. So it's another way to use things from your own pantry and your own freezer as a starting point for your meal planning. Someone who's really good at using what she has as the basis for meal planning is Jordan Page from Fun, Cheap, or Free. She has a great website. She's all about productivity and budgeting and things like that. And her go-to tip is what she calls shelf cooking, so that you're really utilizing what you already have to stretch your budget, and it allows you to buy things in bulk ahead of time and when they're on sale. And that is a great way to stretch your budget and to make sure you're not wasting food. Another great starting point for creating your menu for the week or for the month, however long you're doing it, is to have weekly theme days. The master at this is the Food Nanny. She has cookbooks that are based around this idea, where she has certain days that are for Mexican food, certain days that are for pasta, and she builds her schedule around these predictable categories so that it takes out some of the thinking and allows her just to have a framework. You could organize these theme days over whatever you wanted to do. You could do local cuisines, like we were talking about, Mexican, Italian, Asian, Mediterranean, whatever you want to use. And you could have Taco Tuesday or whatever you wanted. You could also use different food categories, like one day is always soup and salad. One day is always pizza night. One night a week is breakfast food. One night is vegetarian or meatless. That's actually one we're doing right now because I realized we're eating way too much meat on a regular basis. And so I'm trying to have at least one entree a week be vegetarian. I know that's kind of a slow start, but that's where we are right now. So you could try and have fish once a week or beans once a week. Whatever harkens back to your strategy, this is a good way to make sure that your tactics are aligning back with that. If, again, your strategy is to expand your repertoire and, more importantly, the repertoire that your kids have that they will eat, one great recommendation from the What Fresh Hell podcast, which is one of my favorites, is to have a New Food Wednesday. So Margaret Abels, one of the hosts of that show, has made every Wednesday the night that they try something new, and her kids know it's coming, so they're not taken by surprise. They know that they have to at least try it, and that's kind of become a fun expectation in their house. After they try the new food, they decide whether to put it on the regular circulation or not. But I thought that was a great way to get your kids trying new things. You can also choose a theme based on the type of preparation method or cooking method. And this works especially if you have, like I do, I have Wednesday night is super crazy at my house. And so I always know that I need to do something that I can prep the morning of so that It's just a no-brainer. We could eat it quickly and easily once the kids come home from school and start scattering all their different ways. And we usually are eating at different times even on Wednesdays. So that is a great day for me to use either the crock pot or the Instant Pot. And then I can just go to one of those cookbooks and I know that I'm going to just plug in one of those that week. Another great tactic is rollover meals. And this is something that home cooks have been doing for centuries. It only makes sense. You buy one ingredient and you make it stretch over several days. Like maybe you cook a roast the first day of the week and then you use it for tacos, use that shredded meat for tacos the next day, things like that. I often use this with rotisserie chickens. I split it up into 2 meals, and then I've got a little outsourcing mixed in with my rollover. Another great tactic for a quick meal on a weeknight is a one-dish meal. So maybe there's one night a week that you always do a one-dish meal. There are lots of different ways to define that. So it could be just one skillet meal, like a stir fry in a skillet. It could be a sheet pan meal. Those are getting a lot more popular, and we've done that a lot. So where you just layer a bunch of vegetables and then put whatever meat on top. We do it routinely with kielbasa, or recently we started making the Change Your Life chicken from the Lazy Geniuses website, which I will also link to. That's a fabulous recipe that arguably has changed my life. So thank you to Kendra for that. You can also make old-fashioned casseroles. You can use a Dutch oven in the oven to make a stew or something like that once a week. Or you can do bowls. That's another great one-dish meal, so that you're combining everything in just one dish. That kind of segues into the next category, which is assemble your own. Essentially, a bowl is mostly assembling your own meal. So you can have whatever theme you want. Maybe you have a Mexican theme and you have rice and beans with some roasted veggies and some kind of meat and salsa over top, or something like that. You can do that with any kind of ethnic food or any kind of theme in a bowl. But the added bonus there is that it is assemble your own. So especially if you have picky kids, they can choose from a lineup of items to put in those bowls and make sure that they assemble a bowl that they like to eat. So that's one of my go-tos for picky kids. Another great theme that also helps with pickiness is charcuterie. That's also kind of trending right now, and for good reason, in my opinion. We've started doing it every Sunday, thanks to a tip from Anna from Kids Are the Worst, and Anna is the Worst. She's a great person to check out on Instagram. But she started doing that, and she calls it charcuterie, and so we do too, and we eat right after we get home from church. We set out a charcuterie board, and it's meats, cheeses, crackers, and some whatever fruits and veggies we have, usually some things like peppers and pickles, and just a variety of tastes and textures. And this is a great way to get kids to try new things. We try to have at least one new thing on our charcuterie board every week, and then we really challenge the kids. Oh, you got to try it, and they get kind of excited to see what everybody thinks of it, and it's become a fun thing. This may be a little off topic, but when my kids were younger, we've always kind of emphasized this of trying things. And especially when our oldest 2 were young, we would tell them to dominate their food. So we'd all give them a new food to try, and then we'd say, dominate, dominate. And we'd all be chanting it and make it this big fun thing. And then of course they'd dramatically take the bite and either like it or not. But it just kind of made it part of our culture that we try new things in our family. You could have a grilling night once a week in the summer. We've done that some years. You could have one night that you plan to have a freezer meal, and you just set it out to thaw the night before. You can have, again, prep ahead, days that you know that you're going to have to do the prep ahead of time, and you can factor that into your meal planning. One of my favorite things I've done as a great tactic for meal planning is a neighbor and I actually did a swap where I would cook for both families one night a week and she would cook for both families one night a week. So you knew that you always had one night off. Plus, it was another great way to get your kids to try new things and to expand your own repertoire, because if people liked it, you could just add that recipe to your own rotation. So there are lots of creative ways that you can use specific tactics to support those strategies, and different starting off points for how you start that meal planning session. Ideally, when I give all those options, it makes it sound like this big undertaking to do your meal planning session. What we're hoping for, and what I'm trying to get to, is a system that is so automatic and plug and play that actual meal planning session doesn't take very long. So you could just grab your list, scan through, oh, we haven't had that in a while, that in a while, that in a while, and just write it down, plug it into your menu, and you're good to go. This should not be something that takes you hours every week or every month or however often you do it. This is something that the whole purpose of this workshop is to make it so that is not something you dread every week. It's not something that takes a lot of time. That said, you should also, the people who have the most success with meal planning are people who actually schedule it in like an appointment, so that there is a set day every week or every 2 weeks, again, however often you do it. And we'll talk about that more when we get to logistics, about when you actually do your meal planning, because you can have the greatest system in the world, but if you don't set aside specific dedicated time for it, you're never going to follow through and you're never going to do it. I have another section here on this page that we've been following about outsourcing. I did a whole episode on different ways to outsource on my podcast, but there are a lot of ways you can outsource with cooking. You can start with some of the things I've talked about a little bit, with just buying pre-prepped ingredients, buying pre-cooked ingredients that you then add to and finish prepping at home. A lot of the meal kits are becoming popular, and some are mail order. You can have them delivered to your house, but some of them I've started seeing in grocery stores where you can just get a ready-made meal kit, take it home, and have your dinner ready in 15 minutes. The next level is to buy completely pre-prepared meals, either a frozen lasagna or a lot of the big box stores like Sam's Club and Costco have meals that you just have to pop in the oven to cook for your kids. These work especially great on date nights or things like that. You can obviously also buy the meal prepped from a restaurant. You can either, dine in, bring it home, take out and dine at home, or you can go out to a restaurant. You can outsource all the way up to the level of having a personal chef if you happen to have that kind of income and do not have the inclination to cook. Sometimes that sounds awesome, but I actually probably would miss cooking for my family if I did that exclusively. Obviously, we talked a little bit about this, but you can also delegate to your family members. I do this in the summer a lot with my children. This is an idea from Hilary Hess from Helping of Happiness, who we will also profile later in this course. But she has a chef of the week where that person will help cook for that week. I ended up doing more like a chef of the day, and that person would be in charge of cooking. That each child would have a set day of the week that they helped me cook. And this was just to ramp up their cooking skills and to get them more invested in the kitchen, more hands-on in the kitchen. And they really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the time to spend with them. So that's another great tactic.